Hello, everyone, and welcome to NUA's Caregiver Empowerment Programme. In today's webinar, we will be discussing teaching adaptive and social skills. So you're very welcome. My name is Lorna Barry. I'm a behaviour specialist, and I will be delivering the webinar today on teaching adaptive and social skills. So just to begin, this webinar is designed to provide helpful information on teaching adaptive and social skills to individuals with disabilities. So today we'll be discussing how we can gain knowledge on activities of daily living and self-care skills, social skills, functional communication training. And this webinar is suitable for caregivers or family members supporting an individual with an intellectual disability, autism, or attention deficit and hyperactivity disorder. So beginning with the content then, first of all, we're going to look at neurodevelopmental conditions and adaptive functioning. Secondly, we'll look at adaptive skills, so what they are and some examples of these. Thirdly, we'll look at skills teaching, so specific strategies to try and develop skills. Fourth, we're going to look at a specific skills teaching procedure called behaviour chaining and prompting in a little bit more detail. Fifth, we'll look at social skills and some strategies to support the development of these skills. Sixth, we'll look at functional communication training, so a way to develop a communication system. And seventh, we'll look at a summary of what we've discussed today. So our first topic then is looking at neurodevelopmental conditions and adaptive functioning. Okay, so looking at neurodevelopmental conditions and adaptive functioning then, first of all, we're going to look at why do individuals with disabilities need support with adaptive and social skills. The first thing that we look at is the cognitive and social challenges that can be experienced by an individual with an intellectual disability, autism, or ADHD as a result of the diagnosis. So, as a result of these diagnoses, individuals can experience difficulties in the areas of learning, areas of communication, and social interaction that can impact their ability to perform daily activities, so adaptive skills and social skills independently. The second of all is individuals with these diagnoses can experience a lot of barriers to independence. So these delayed or impaired adaptive and social skills can hinder people in the areas of self-care, in the areas of decision making, and also in participation in social and community life. Why are adaptive and social skills so crucial? So, adaptive and social skills promote independence. So, it helps the individual to live more autonomously, more confidently, to perform these things every day independently. Being able to perform these things independently and being able to be more autonomous also helps foster a sense of well-being. So it can contribute to a sense of achievement, a sense of self-worth, and a sense of belonging within your community. Adaptive and social skills also can improve quality of life. So, adaptive and social skills can promote better inclusion in school, work, and community settings. So, really, when we're looking at our adaptive skills, we're looking at them as the building blocks of an independent and fulfilling life. So, our support and your support at home is the key to unlocking the potential of these skills. The second topic that we're going to look at is adaptive skills in a little bit more detail. Adaptive skills are defined as practical, everyday skills needed to function and meet the demands of one's environment. So, anything within the environment that we need to do to look after ourselves. So, it includes the skills necessary to effectively and independently take care of oneself and to interact with other people. So, we look at this across a variety of different skill areas and skill domains, including self care, so the ability to look after yourself in terms of your personal hygiene, home or school living, so the skills necessary to get yourself, independent at home or get yourself independent in school, such as being able to perform tasks for yourself, being able to organize yourself in your environment. Social skills, so the ability to interact with other people independently and get your needs met in a social sense. Academics, then, obviously related to schoolwork, college, so on and so forth. Work, so specific skills that we need for work. So, being able to manage ourselves in work, being able to manage our time, for example, being able to perform specific skills associated with a task in work. And also community use. So, how to manage ourselves in the community, how to cross the road effectively and safely, how to use public transport, for example. So, all of these adaptive skills contribute to us being able to live independently and autonomously. The development of adaptive skills for people experiencing deficits in these areas can allow us to increase their participation in things like personal care and daily routines. Once we develop these adaptive skills as well, it can also allow people to enter new environments or situations and allow individuals to increase their independence across a variety of different domains. So, the overall goal at all times is trying to increase independence across a variety of different domains. Looking more specifically then at activities of daily living, the activities of daily living are a series of basic activities necessary for independent living at home or in the community. So these are skills that are performed on a daily basis by us all. ADLs are made up of 5 key tasks that are required to live an independent and healthy life. So these include things like bathing, so our personal hygiene routines, our ability to shower or bath ourselves, our ability to wash our hair, our ability to wash our face, brush our teeth, so on and so forth. So all of these things are encompassed within that category of bathing. The second one is dressing. So, dressing, obviously, being able to dress ourselves, being able to dress appropriately for the weather, for example, being able to dress appropriately for the situation. So, all of these things come in under dressing. Transferring then is the ability to transfer between environments or between items. So, the ability, for example, to move from a bed to a chair, or for a bed to standing up, or from a chair to the bathroom, and so on and so forth. So, being able to move freely through our environments. The fourth area is continence or incontinence care. So, that obviously relates to the ability to toilet. So, the ability to pass bowel movements independently, the ability to urinate independently in the toilet, and any other care, ongoing care that might be needed, the ability to manage that yourself. So, being able to manage incontinence wear yourself, and so on and so forth. And then we look at meal prep and feeding as well. So, this obviously encompasses the ability to prepare food, but also the ability to choose appropriate foods, to choose healthy foods, and so on and so forth. So, when we're looking at developing skills in adaptive areas and we're looking at developing self care skills, we often look at this broad area of activities of daily living to help us decide where to target our intervention and where to support individuals that need it. Our third topic is skills teaching. So, with skills teaching, we're going to look at a few general principles that help us develop skills across areas such as adaptive functioning, self care, and social skills. So, the general principles that we try to apply when skills teaching are really looking at breaking a task down into smaller steps. So, this is something that we'll look at a little bit more on the next slide in terms of task analysis as a method of this. But we're always looking at that big skill and how we can break it down into smaller, more easily achievable components. The second thing that we look at is the level of support that we need to provide and trying to reduce this level of support over time. So, again, in a couple of slides, I'll be talking about something called prompting. So, how we can reduce prompting over time to enable independence for individuals. The third thing that we look at is repetition. So, repetition in terms of increased opportunities to practice the skill. So, increased opportunities to learn and increased opportunities to practice. So, this repetition really helps us develop these skills over time. And also, reinforcement of successful attempts. So, making sure that we're reinforcing this behavior to strengthen it over time. So, again, this is something that we revisit in a while. The next thing that we look at is generalization of skills to new situations if possible or if needed. So, what we're always looking to do is teach skills that can be applicable in a variety of situations so that we're able to use these over time and across many different environments. The fourth thing is ensuring that the individual has enough time to successfully complete the task. So, making sure that we're providing the individual with plenty of time. And lastly, that we're being patient and we're not trying to move on to the next step before the person that we're supporting is ready. So, we're trying to be patient and give lots of time for that person to develop the skill independently. So, oftentimes we can be, I suppose, motivated to try and help. So, we might be motivated to jump in and try and help somebody or do something for them. But what we're really trying to do is pull back our support, give the person time, and see if they need help over time. So, a strategy to support individuals who struggle with their ADLs is a task analysis, as I've said. So, we're going to discuss that on the next slide. A task analysis basically involves breaking a more complex skill down into smaller, teachable, more achievable components or units. So, the product of which is usually sequentially ordered steps or tasks. So, something similar to what we have on the right hand side there, which is the task analysis of washing your hands. So, what we're always trying to do is take that bigger skill, so for example, washing hands, and breaking it down into smaller, teachable components. So, for example, as well, there are a number of small individual steps involved in taking a shower, so that when we take them all together, they make up a good personal hygiene routine. So, if we're taking a shower and we're washing our hair, for example, there's the first step of wetting our hair, the second step of rubbing shampoo into our hair, and the third step, rinsing our hair. And there might be many more steps after that, depending on the person's usual shower routine. So you can find some examples and additional guidance on task analysis in the sample tools section of your learning management system. And we'll discuss this a little bit further in the next slide as well. So the next, I suppose, thing in relation to task analysis is how do we construct a task analysis? So how do we identify these steps that we need to teach? What we try to do when constructing a task analysis is, first of all, we could observe a competent individual performing the task. So, somebody who's already mastered the task or is fluent in it. So, for example, washing hands, what we might do is ask a colleague, can you wash your hands? And we note down the different steps involved in that task. So, we're noting down that they turn on the tap first, they wet their hands second, they put soap on their hands third, they rub their hands together fourth, and so on and so forth until the complete sequence of those steps is completed. We could consult with experts in performing the task, or we could perform the sequence of behaviours ourselves and again try to note all of the discrete components within it. It's also important to note that when we have that sequence identified and when we have the steps within that task analysis identified, we should then review this again with the particular individual in mind. So, what we want to be cognizant of at that point is asking ourselves, is this task broken down enough, for example? Do I need to add some further steps in? Is this task broken down too much for the individual? Is it too complex? Can I simplify it? Do I need to group steps together, for example? So rather than breaking down a hand washing sequence to rubbing palms together, rubbing the back of the hand together, rubbing in between the fingers, for example, that we could just put that as rubbing soap into hands rather than breaking it down into three smaller steps. So we're always trying to review this with the skill level of the individual in mind and identifying, does it need to be broken down a little bit more, or can we group some steps together to make things flow a little bit better? So, for example, when brushing teeth, do you need to put in the steps of picking up the toothpaste and opening the toothpaste and then putting the toothpaste on the toothbrush, or can we just put that into one step of picking up the toothpaste or putting toothpaste on the toothbrush? Can we group together, for example, brushing upper teeth, or do we need to break it down into a tooth by tooth scenario? So, when you think the steps are suitable for the particular learner, then what we want to try and do is test it out with the learner. So, we're trying to identify if the prompt levels required for the learner to successfully complete each step kind of match the task analysis that we've identified. The next topic then is looking at behavior chaining and prompting. So, behavior chaining is a teaching method that's based on task analysis. So, in behavior chaining, all of the smaller units of behavior that we've identified throughout that task analysis, so for example, on the right hand side, our toothbrushing task analysis there, breaking all of these skills down. With behavior chaining, what we're trying to do is teach each of these steps as a link and as part of a bigger chain. So each of these links add together to make that behavior chain of the complete skill. So the series of related behaviors is taught in a step by step manner using this chaining until the full sequence of the behavior has been mastered. So, by teaching each individual response, so by breaking the steps down into these individual discrete steps and teaching them in isolation, this helps us to create a link in a chain of behavior that, when completed altogether, again, makes up that important skill. So, we have three different types of behavior chaining that we'll look at a little bit further in the coming slides. So, the first is forward chaining, second is backward chaining, and the third is total task chaining. Forward chaining is a behavior chaining procedure that begins with teaching a sequence of behavior in a chronological order. So, from the first step to the last step in order to complete a task. So, each step in performing the task must be mastered before the next step is added, and reinforcement is provided after completing the current teaching step. We want to try and reduce our prompt level over time until we're completing it independently. And when a step is mastered, then the next step in the task will be added to the chain. So, for example, with our hand washing task analysis on the right hand side, we have 7 discrete steps within that each need to be taught independently of each other in order for that behavior chain to come together. So, what we would look at doing is teaching the first step of turning on the water first in isolation, and then supporting the individual to complete steps 2 through 7. So, when we're looking at teaching turn on water, we may begin with full physical guidance. So, we may begin with hand over hand prompting, for example, to teach the person to turn on the tap. So, when we're using this, we're trying to immediately reinforce after this is completed. So, we might be using positive praise, for example. So, great job turning on the tap. We might be using something like tangible reinforcement or a token system to help the person identify that this is the correct behavior. And then we fully assist with the completion of the rest of the steps. So, we help the person put their hands under the water to wet them, help them dispense the soap onto the hands, rub hands together, and so on and so forth. So once the person is completing the first step of turn on water successfully using a full physical prompt, so what we've seen is they're successfully turning on the water with a full physical prompt over a number of different repetitions of this or practice sessions of this, then we're going to reduce our prompt level to a partial physical prompt. So for example, we might gently guide their elbow towards the tap to indicate to them to turn on the water. So now we're only reinforcing completing the step with the reduced prompt. So we're not reinforcing the attempts when we have to use hand over hand. We're only reinforcing when the person successfully completes the step with our elbow guided prompt. And then again, we're continuing to fully assist with the completion of the rest of the steps. Once the person, I suppose, over time has been successfully over practice sessions turning on the tap with that elbow guided prompt, then we're going to look at introducing the step of getting them to turn on that tap without prompting or independently. So holding back and waiting to see, do they turn on the water when they're in front of the sink? And once they're doing that, then we can say that this step is mastered and we're moving on to the next step. So, what we try to do there is turn on water. We expect that the person will complete that independently. And then we're providing guidance for wetting hands. So, we're using full physical guidance, fading to partial prompting, fading to independent within that, then until the person is independently completing the step of wetting their hands. And then we move on to teaching the next step in that chain, which is dispensing the soap onto the hands. So we keep the turn on the water and wet hands as mastered. So the person is completing those. And we're teaching step 3 and supporting with steps 4 until 7. And we continue this sequence until all of the steps in that sequence have been mastered and the person is completing each of them independently. And it's important to remember that we only reinforce the step that we are currently teaching. So, backward chaining then is basically the opposite of forward chaining. So, with forward chaining, we're starting with the first step and teaching sequentially to the last step, whereas with backward chaining, we're starting with the last step and teaching backwards to the first step. So instead of doing it in chronological order, it begins with teaching the series of behaviors in reverse. And in backward chaining, all the behaviors are initially completed by the person supporting, so the parent, teacher, or care worker, except for the final behavior, which is done by the individual. So, for example, if we're looking at backwards chaining when trying to teach somebody to make a sandwich, what we would do is, as the person supporting, we would put the bread onto the plate, we would butter the bread, we would put the ham on the bread, we would put the top piece of bread onto the ham and make the sandwich out of it. And then, in terms of moving it from the cutting board onto the plate, we would support the individual to do that step. Then, as we move backwards over time, we're asking the person to maybe put the top slice of bread onto the ham and put the behavior onto the plate, the sandwich onto the plate, and then moving backwards through that sequence over time. Or, for example, if we look at a jigsaw puzzle, if we're trying to teach somebody a 4-piece jigsaw puzzle, we would complete the first 3 pieces of the jigsaw puzzle, asking the person to put the last piece in. And then once they have that mastered, we would move back to completing 2 pieces of the jigsaw puzzle and asking the person to complete steps 3 and 4, so pieces 3 and 4 of the jigsaw, and moving backwards like that until they're completing the entire 4-piece puzzle themselves. In total task training, then, each step in the chain is taught every time the task is completed. So, this type of chaining is more suitable for skills where the learner is able to complete some of the steps but cannot complete them in a sequence. So, for example, they've no problem opening the cap of the toothpaste, or they've no problem brushing the upper teeth in their mouth, but they have difficulties putting these together in the correct sequence. So, this form of chaining is what we all kind of use naturally to teach a skill. So, we're trying to help the person complete each step and prompting as we go. The benefits of this approach is that the person has the opportunity to practice each step each time, whereas with the previous examples, forward chaining and backward chaining, we're just trying to teach each step in isolation. So, common examples of where we'd use total task training would be showering or brushing teeth. So, looking at prompting in a little bit more detail then. Prompts are cues that increase the likelihood that learners will make correct responses. So, it's something that we do to ensure that the person performs the behavior correctly. So, in other words, it's assistance given before or as the learner attempts to perform the skill. Prompting procedures involve providing and then removing prompts so that the learner begins to perform skills independently. Desired responses are reinforced to encourage the learner to correctly perform the task in the future. So it's always important to use the least amount of prompting necessary to accomplish the goal. And you want to try and avoid having the learner become prompt dependent, which is relying on the prompt to get the job done. So, this is why it's important that we begin teaching with using a prompt, but we quickly plan to remove this prompt out as fast as we can to avoid that reliance on the prompt over time. You can use prompts when the learner is about to make an incorrect response, so being able to guide them in the right direction. When the individual makes an incorrect response and you're trying to give them feedback and show them how it's done correctly, or the person doesn't respond at all, in which case we're trying to prompt the correct response there. And there are various different types of prompts to accommodate different learning styles and abilities, which we'll look at a little bit more in more detail at the coming slides. So there are many different types of prompts that we can use to try and teach skills. The first of these are physical prompts. So within our physical prompts, we have three different types. First being full physical prompts. So this is also known as hand over hand guidance, whereby we can take our hand and put it on the person's hand to support them to complete the action that we're looking for, complete the behavior that we're looking for. So for example, toothbrushing, we might take our hand, place it on the individual's hand and guide them towards the toothbrush, helping them to grab the toothbrush and pick it up. For partial physical prompting, what we might try to do is remove that back and gently guide the person's elbow towards the toothbrush, indicating that they're to pick the toothbrush up. And with light touch and shadowing, we can fade that back even further to, for example, give somebody a light tap on the wrist or on the hand or on the shoulder to indicate you're supposed to pick up the toothbrush now. With our verbal prompting, we have full verbal prompting, which is where we use the complete direction or the complete word if we're trying to model how to say something. So, for example, if we're trying to teach somebody to ask for juice, the full verbal prompt would be juice. A partial verbal prompt would be ju, and then phonemic, we might go j. So, we're trying to fade out the amount of the prompt that we're giving over time. And then with our visual prompts, we have a number of different types of visual prompts as well. So we have modeling, which is where we show somebody how to engage in the behavior. So we show somebody exactly what they're supposed to do. So, for example, if we're trying to teach somebody how to wash their hair, then we're modeling that sequence for them. So we're showing them you put your hands here and you might move the shampoo around and then fade that out over time. We have a stimulus prompt, which can be a sign. So something like go, for example, is a sign in our environment, a stimulus prompt in our environment. Positional prompts, so whereby we might move the correct items closer to the individual. So for that example of toothbrushing, where we move the toothbrush closer to the individual to indicate it's time to start that sequence. And then gestural are things like prompting. So when we're trying to show somebody where to go, we'd use gestural prompt to say over there. So using our finger prompt or using our body language and hand gestures to indicate to the person the correct behavior. So again, we always try to use least to most prompting. So that's where we start with less intrusive prompts. So our less intrusive prompts would be things like natural cues in the environment, our gestural prompts, our pictures or visual prompts, modeling or demonstrating to somebody how to do a behavior. Whereas our more intrusive prompts are things like verbal prompting, light physical guidance, and full physical prompting. So we always want to try and consider carefully the level of assistance that the learner requires. So we want to increase prompting if the learner requires more support and then move down the hierarchy from least to most. We want to try and fade out prompts and prevent prompt dependency by moving up the prompt hierarchy from most to least. So that's how we would try to, again, fade that out to make sure that the person doesn't become prompt dependent. So whereby we might start with full physical guidance and quickly pull back to partial physical guidance, to a verbal prompt or a visual prompt, and then gradually moving on towards maybe model prompts. So we want to use least to most if the learner has solid foundational skills and if they can become easily prompt dependent. So we might want to try and stay at the top of that hierarchy in terms of using our gesture prompts or our stimulus prompts. If the person has these solid foundational skills or if they can become easily prompt dependent. And we might choose most to least prompting if the learner acquires new skills very slowly over time. So, whereby we carefully have to pull away that support to make sure that the person continues to learn and acquire that skill, or if the learner has few prerequisite skills to be able to initiate that skill. So again, we're always trying to fade or remove prompts as soon as a learner is showing any kind of independence to avoid prompt dependency. And we want to also try and be conscious of inadvertent prompting. So things like using our facial expressions, our tone of voice, and so on and so forth can inadvertently become prompts that the person becomes dependent on over time. So, shaping, I suppose, is similar enough to behavior chaining, and it's the process of reinforcing successive approximations of the desired behavior over time. So, it's where a new behavior is taught through the use of reinforcement until the target behavior is achieved. And shaping often starts with a task analysis, again, to break that larger task down into smaller and more manageable successive steps. So it's important that everybody involved is aware of the smaller approximations of the target behavior and knows when and how to reinforce these approximations. So, for example, if we're trying to reinforce or shape or develop the skill of wearing a jacket outside, then what we might look at doing is breaking that down and reinforcing the person for holding their coat in their hand outside. So that's where we're starting with, just simply holding the coat outside, you're getting reinforced for that. Then the next thing we're looking at moving to is putting one arm into the coat outside. The one after that is putting two arms into the coat, and then we're gradually increasing the duration of time that somebody is leaving the coat on for. So we might start with wearing the coat for a minute and shape that up to wearing a coat for 30 minutes over time. So what we're doing there is we're moving the need for the behavior or the eventual kind of target for the behavior and increasing the difficulty for the individual very gradually over time so that they continue to be motivated, they continue to access reinforcement, and they gradually shape up that skill. Another example, buttering bread. So at the beginning, we might reinforce putting the knife into the butter. Then we're reinforcing scooping the butter onto the knife. Then we're reinforcing putting knife with butter on the bread. And then lastly, we're dragging the knife with butter across the bread. And over time, we will shape that up by first of all reinforcing just one dragging of the knife across the bread, moving to two drags of the knife across the bread, moving to three drags of the knife across the bread until the person is completely covering the bread in the butter. And that's shaped up that behavior over time. So, our sixth topic is social skills. Social skills refer to an individual's ability to interact with others. So, deficits in social skills can impact on independence and the ability to deal with everyday life situations. So, the ability to deal with, for example, stressful situations, to deal with conflict in situations where the person may need support or need help. So, all of these things can impact the individual in different ways. Some examples of social skills deficits or difficulties include poor eye contact, pedantic or odd speech patterns, lack of joint attention with others, difficulty initiating conversations with others, or difficulty maintaining conversations over time, and even difficulties with ending conversations. Lack of social problem solving ability, so the lack of ability to understand socially what's happening and the lack of ability to solve problems that are occurring socially for them, and difficulty in interpreting body language as well. When we're deciding which social skills to teach, it's important to consider the following. So, first of all, is this social skill necessary? So, for example, eye contact is not needed for an individual to take in information, but historically, eye contact would have been one of the most important or foremost skills that we would have tried to teach. So over time, I suppose we've come to realize that eye contact isn't really needed for an individual to take in information or even for an individual to communicate effectively with others around them. Secondly, we want to consider, can the environment be adapted for the individual rather than, I suppose, teaching the skill to the individual? So we want to be conscious, for example, of communicating through clear words rather than body language if somebody has difficulty with interpreting body language. So we want to make sure that we're adapting our approach and adapting the environment to meet the needs of the individual. We want to try and rely more on clear cues, so things like words rather than tone or facial expression, as these may be harder for some people to pick up on. We want to be very clear in the way that we communicate with individuals. And we want to try and make sure that we allow space and we consider the need to teach the individual how to say no and how to advocate for themselves. Some ways to teach social skills include social stories, social scripts, social skills groups, and video modelling, which we'll look at a little bit further in the coming slides. Looking at social stories are simple short stories that describe social situations that an individual may encounter in everyday life. And social stories incorporate aspects of priming. So, priming being exposure to a stimulus and preparation around what to expect, and also self management. So, one's ability to manage themselves in their environments. So, social skills always kind of target an aspect of that self management. So, teaching somebody how to manage themselves within that social situation. Social stories explain social situations, so whatever social situation it might be, and they help people learn what to expect and what will happen in these situations. So they usually, I suppose, incorporate some element of a rule or a social situation that the person is struggling with, and we need to individualize them to suit the person and not the situation. So, for example, some people might need supplement of visuals if they can't read or if text alone is not suitable for them. They might need more specifics. So rather than generic pictures, we might be looking at taking a photo of the specific location, specific person, so on and so forth. And social stories are really useful in the lead up to a new situation or event to help somebody understand the difference or the change in situation and right before the event will happen. So, an example of social story is over there on the right. So, for example, this is trying to teach somebody how to, I suppose, deal with their frustration. So, sometimes I feel frustrated or upset. It's okay to feel frustrated, but I need to stop and calm down. My work doesn't need to be perfect, I just need to try my best. When I am frustrated or upset, I can tell Mrs. Ashley or Mrs. Holbrook and they can help. So, what we're doing here is teaching the person about that feeling or about that social rule. So, it's okay to feel frustrated, but the rule being, I need to stop and calm down. And here's my alternative behavior. When I am frustrated or upset, I can tell somebody about it and they can help me. So, we're trying to frame it in terms of this is what's happening, this is what I need to do, and this is what I can do as an alternative. So I can ask somebody for help as an alternative to engaging in any kind of aggressive behavior or verbal aggression or whatever it might be. So when we're introducing our social stories, we're always trying to look at that social rule and we're always trying to look at that alternative behavior for what the person can do differently. So there's some different bits of information in the third party link section in the learning management system, and you can also find some more information on writing social stories by visiting carolgraysocialstories.com. Social scripts can be developed to allow individuals practice navigating very specific social situations. So they're somewhat similar to social stories, but they focus on the phrases that an individual can choose to say during specific situations. So, for example, if we're trying to teach somebody how to respond to hello, then we can teach somebody, for example, your friend says hello, then you should say, hello, how are you, as a response. So we can have that written or we can have that in visual format as a prompt for the person in the format of that social script. And as the individual becomes more confident in that given situation, we can fade that out. So we can remove out the need for that visual or textual support for the person to understand what's happening. So, video modeling then involves showing the individual a video of themselves or another person performing the target skill. So, they then perform the steps shown in the video. So basically, it's showing somebody a roadmap or a way of doing it and asking the person to immediately practice it and give them feedback then on their practice. So the clips can demonstrate one step or an entire sequence of skills for the individual. So some examples where we might use video modeling in terms of teaching social skills would be teaching somebody how to initiate a conversation, for example. So how to make eye contact with somebody to show that you're interested in having a conversation with them. Some conversation openers or opening lines for a conversation, such as, how are you? The weather is nice outside today, for example. And then how to respond appropriately to somebody else's conversational response. So again, we can have this in an entire sequence of skills, such as approaching a person, making eye contact, your initial opening of a conversation, or we can break that more discreetly down into those specific components of making eye contact with somebody appropriately and just working on that skill, and then working on a conversational opener separately. So, our video modeling, the whole purpose of it is to provide somebody with that model or that showing them how it's done, and then asking them to immediately perform the skill or monitoring them performing the skill and giving them feedback on their performance so that they can learn. So, positive feedback, that was a great job, or corrective feedback, maybe we can try this differently next time. So, some of the benefits of video modeling are that it's quite a low demand activity. It's naturally reinforcing to many children. I suppose it helps people see exactly what they're supposed to do, and it minimizes attention requirements as well. So, you're looking at a very small area and hearing only minimum necessary language. So, it's very easy to hone in on that very specific skill that we're trying to teach. Okay, lastly, then within social skills, we look at social skills groups. Social skills groups are typically small groups led by an instructor where individuals can learn and practice social skills with other people. Social skills groups have a significant evidence base behind them and have been shown by research to be really effective in developing social skills with individuals with a wide variety of different ages and a wide variety of different abilities. Social skills groups can provide a supportive environment in which specific skills can be targeted and practiced. So, oftentimes, people within these groups are experiencing similar difficulties in their social lives, and therefore, it's a space to share and practice in a safe way. Peers can also then learn from each other within the group. So, you might visit peersireland.com for some more information on social skills groups that run across Ireland. You can also find a direct hyperlink in the third party link section in your learning management system. Functional communication training is the process of teaching meaningful and functional communication in a natural way to individuals. FCT is important as communication barriers can lead to behaviours of concern in people with disabilities. So, what we know is that one of the most common precursors for somebody engaging in behaviours of concern is that they have a communication difficulty. Functional communication training may not necessarily mean learning words. Instead, it might mean teaching an individual to communicate in any type of suitable way for them. Some of the interventions used in FCT include verbal gestures, sign language, or the use of pictures or icons, such as Picture Exchange Communication System or PECS. The overall goal of FCT is to provide the individual with a different way to communicate so that the behaviours of concern that may come from being frustrated due to an inability to communicate are naturally eliminated, and we find a more appropriate way for that person to communicate their needs and have their needs met. Functional communication training is based on the premise that all behaviour communicates something. So, due to the idea that behavior is trying to communicate something, it is important to figure out what happens before the behavior occurs and what happens after the behavior in order to determine where to begin teaching. So, for example, if a child does not have a way to ask for food, they might cry and they might hit the fridge. The parent sees this and realizes, oh, the child might want some food. Therefore, the child is given food and stops crying. However, over time, the child may learn that if they want food, the appropriate way to ask for it is to cry and hit the fridge. So, when we're looking at functional communication training in relation to this, then we would look at teaching another way for the child to ask for food in a more functional way. So, for example, that they might exchange a visual for the food. So, there might be a picture of the type of food that they're looking for. So, for example, an apple. We have a picture of an apple. We teach the child to exchange that picture of the apple for an actual apple itself. So, therefore, exchanging that picture reduces the need for that child to cry and hit the fridge in order to get their food. Or we could present a choice board with lots of different food options, or teach them how to emit a love sign or sign language that represents the food that they're looking for. As we discussed, FCT is used to teach and establish replacement behaviours for inappropriate or harmful behaviours. So, some essential elements to figure out before teaching FCT would include identifying what happened before the behaviour. So, what was the antecedent? What was the child looking for? What did they want? What did they need? Then we identify the behaviour itself. So, for example, crying and hitting the fridge, and identify what happened after the behaviour. So, for example, the child received the food. It's important to understand all of the above elements so that we can teach an appropriate communication to access exactly what it is the individual is looking for. So, what does the individual want, or what were they previously accessing through the use of behaviours of concern? Some common examples might be, for example, needing help. So, I'm crying out and I get support as a result. Therefore, my crying out might be seeking help or needing help. So, if I can teach an appropriate replacement to that, so for example, teaching somebody to ask for help, then that reduces the need for me to engage in behaviours of concern to get access to that. Needing food or drink, as we just discussed, or needing affection or attention as well. Some general tips for being a communicative partner when we're looking at FCT. We're trying to use the appropriate tone, speed, difficulty in terms of our communication with others. So we might need to slow down and simplify our language when speaking with people who are experiencing communication difficulties. We might try to use our body language, hand gestures, and so on and so forth to communicate and supplement our communication. So, using big open smiles, for example, to positively communicate with somebody, using gestures to point or hands up to stop, for example, to support the person's understanding of what it is we're trying to tell them. We want to give somebody plenty of time to process language. So, individuals with communication difficulties, giving them a little bit more time to process what it is we're saying and giving them more time to complete the actions that we're asking them to complete. And we want to adjust for individual needs as well. So, for example, literal thinking, we want to make sure that we are being very clear and concise in the way that we are describing things. We want to try and build in time for communication as well. So sometimes, again, when an individual is unable to communicate, it's tempting to help by constantly doing things for them. However, when we jump in too quickly or we do things for someone or we assume that they need help, then we're actually not allowing for communication opportunities. So, for example, if we're getting ready to go outside and I go and get the shoes and I put the shoes on the child, then that's not allowing the child the time to ask for their shoes or ask for help in putting on their shoes. So, sometimes taking a step back and allowing that little bit more time for those communication opportunities to arise can help that person develop the communication over time as well. We want to also try to be face to face with the person so that you can more easily observe what they're interested in and kind of follow their lead. And we want to try and give feedback as often as we can. So, rewarding any attempts or reinforcing any attempts to understand and communicate. And by doing this, we can increase the likelihood that they'll try to do this again and again. When we're prompting communication responses, then, as we discussed earlier, a prompt is a support used to encourage the desired behaviour that otherwise would not occur. So the learner is provided with some assistance to increase the probability that the desired behaviour will occur. Successfully emitting the desired behaviour leads to reinforcement, therefore reinforcing learning. So we're always, as we said before, identifying the least intrusive response or least intrusive prompt required to make the desired response occur. We're always trying to start with those visual, verbal prompts rather than physical prompts. We want to deliver reinforcement for correct responses in line with the level of independence displayed. So, if we're trying to teach somebody using modeling and they're displaying the correct response, then we're trying to make sure that we're reinforcing that and then feeding out as quickly as we can to fully independent. And as I've said multiple times before, fading out the prompt. So once the skill has been mastered, removing the prompt or continuing to move towards a less intrusive prompt until we've developed that independence to prevent that prompt dependency. Prompting can be used and is used with all individuals regardless of age or ability. So we all use prompting in our everyday interactions with each other. In work, for example, where we're trying to teach somebody how to take over something that we've been working on. And it can be used across home, school, and community settings to increase skills and remove frustration for individuals that are associated with making errors. One of our most important principles then when we're looking at skills teaching and developing skills is reinforcement. So reinforcement is a behavioral principle based on introducing or removing a stimuli to strengthen a behavior or make it more likely that the behavior will occur over time. So this can be positive or negative. So in that sense, it means that we can add something to the individual or we can take something away from the individual that makes their behavior more likely to occur in the future. So, for example, taking something away. So, if somebody is having an extreme fear response and is engaging in behaviors of concern to try and avoid that situation. So, for example, we're going to the dentist, the person really doesn't like the dentist, they're screaming, they're trying to run away, and therefore we say, okay, we don't need to go into the dentist. The removal of that demand of going to the dentist will increase the likelihood that somebody will engage in that kind of screaming and running away behavior over time because it got taken away and they didn't have to do it. Another positive way that we can reinforce is through adding, for example, positive praise. So we might say, well done, great job. So positive praise, or we might give somebody something. So, for example, we get a bonus for doing a good job at work. So, all of these things increase the likelihood that that behavior will occur again in the future. When we're looking at reinforcement, we're always looking at personalizing it. So everybody is reinforced by different things, everybody has different personal interests. So, therefore, reinforcement should be in line with this. And we need to make sure that the reinforcement is actually preferred by the individual. We need to be contingent. So, we need to make sure that we're identifying what it is that we're reinforcing and that we're reinforcing every opportunity that we can. It should be matched to the behavior. And tangible reinforcement should also be paired with social reinforcement. So if you're using something like giving somebody a toy or giving somebody food as reinforcement to strengthen a behavior, it should always be paired with some form of social reinforcement, such as social praise, positive body language, so on and so forth, to make sure that we're not becoming reliant on those tangible reinforcers over time. And we're trying to fade out our reinforcement then to promote independence and promote skill acquisition. Looking a little bit more at positive reinforcement, because one of the, I suppose, common things that comes up is that it's looked at as bribery. But when we're looking at bribery, we're often looking at something that is occurring when a behavior has already happened. So a behavior has already begun to escalate, and we're therefore trying to offer something for the person to stop. So oftentimes it means that the individual engaging in behaviors of concern or the child is in control of the situation. So we're offering something again to try and stop a behavior or influence the behavior in the moment. It often occurs after behaviors of concern have already begun. So it can stop behavior in the short term, but increases it in the long term because people very quickly realize, okay, I begin to engage in these behaviors. I get offered something that I like, and therefore I stop. So me engaging in these behaviors means that I get offered more things that I like. Whereas positive reinforcement, I suppose the adult or the person that's delivering reinforcement is in control of that. And it's delivered contingently in a planned way. So, in a very first then type of way. So first we engage in this behavior and then we get this afterwards. So rather than looking at it as a way to stop a behavior. So it increases, strengthens, and maintains the appropriate behavior over time. Okay, then just to summarize what we've gone through today. Today we went through some helpful information about gaining knowledge on activities of daily living and self-care skills, gaining knowledge on social skills, and gaining knowledge of functional communication training. So, compared to before we started, you should now have a greater understanding of what are activities of daily living and self care skills, and exploring some methods to increase these skills. What are social skills? How do we identify what skills to teach, and how do we teach these? And also functional communication training, so what this looks like and how it can be used. Some references that might be of use are here for you on this slide. And thank you very much for your time and attention during today's webinar. We hope you found it helpful.